Hey YouTube, Turbine Dude here. I'm here picking up my airplane at the shop today. It went back in for the 600 hour. A couple months ago it was in here for the 100, 200, 400 and the annual inspection. And the 600 hour was due, but due to scheduling issues I had to bring it back for them to complete that. So I'm going to run through a control check real quick. The 600 hour, they take the landing gear off and they do a non-destructive testing on the gear trunnions. So that's the attach points that actually attach the landing gear to the airplane. So they have a testing rig, I believe it's an eddy current machine where they check those for cracks. So good news is everything passed. The other thing they do is they take the flap drives apart. So there's some jack screws that drive the flaps down, and there's a great big nut that's attached to the flap, and as the jack screw turns it pushes the nut, which pushes the flaps out. So just since they did some control rigging on the airplane, I'm going to go ahead and video putting all the control surfaces down, the flaps, and then show me giving the airplane roll input to make sure the spoilers come up correctly, and then I'll do an elevator check as well. So just want to make sure everything's working correctly before I take it in the air. That's a good idea. Anytime anybody does maintenance on your flight controls, that you check those out before you take the airplane in the air. Once we are airborne, I'll go ahead and cycle the landing gear a few times, just make sure that's all happy. I think as part of that inspection, they would have put the airplane on jacks and done a gear swing, or they would have cycled the gear a few times. So that should have been done already. But before I get too far from the airport, I'll go ahead and cycle the gear a few times. I'll run the flaps all the way out to 40, bearing in mind the placard limits on the flap limit speeds. So I'll cycle the flaps a few times and the gear a few times just to make sure everything's good to go before I head for home. In this video also I'm going to talk about some of the bills that have come with owning an airplane of this caliber. You'd be shocked what some of the little parts cost. So a lot of things are pretty reasonable, but some things aren't as reasonable. So there's a little shear pin that attaches the landing gear doors to the gear. If you're in an emergency extending the landing gear and the doors were hung up, it's actually got a shear pin in there where the door can separate from the landing gear and the gear can kind of force its way out to get down and locked. Anyway, that little shear pin from Mitsubishi is $1,600 and some odd dollars, $1,663 I think was the number. So it's a little pin, it's smaller than a AA battery. But anyway, I'll talk about some of the invoices and some of the bills that have been generated. Overall, very happy with it, and I think it's, again, very reasonable for what you're getting. But there can still be some large bills, so I'll talk about that in some of the other video segments. For now, enjoy watching me cycle the controls. We're going to do a quick control check just to make sure we're good there. So follow the video for more. There's flaps 40, flaps 20. It's going to work its way up to flaps 5, and it has a little interrupter cam that does that gradually. If it went straight from 20 to 5, the airplane, you get sort of a sinking sensation in the back that's uncomfortable for passengers. So they have a little interrupter cam, so that happens sort of gradually. So that's what you saw there. And from 5 to up, I'm going to go ahead and run the roll trim, so you'll see the trim ailerons coming out on the trailing edge flaps. So here I'm giving it roll right input, and I'm watching the trim position gauge here in the cockpit. So I'm going to roll the aircraft roll trim to the right. I'm not going to run it all the way to the stop, but that was most of the way to the right. We're going to roll it back to the left. Coming through center on the roll trim. I'm going to continue giving it roll trim to the left. And again, we're just going to verify that those trim ailerons are moving like they should. I'm going to go back and watch this video before I start the engines up and take off, just to make sure all the control surfaces are doing what they're doing. So right now I'm just verbalizing everything I'm doing. Later I'm going to make sure that what I'm verbalizing matches what I'm seeing on the control surfaces on the outside of the airplane. So there's roll trim coming back to center. And I'm showing 0 on the indicator. There is left rotor trim. Coming back to center. Right rotor trim. Full nose up on the elevator. Full nose down. I'm going to trim pitch up. So you should see the little tab on the elevator moving. As I trim it nose down, that tab should be moving. As I trim it nose up, the tab should be moving down. So I'm trimming it more nose down. I'm going to trim it back to the index mark for takeoff. Actually 5 units is where I'm going to leave that one. So all my trims are centered, 5 units, which is the takeoff setting on the pitch trim. Roll trim is neutral, rudder trim is neutral. Here I'm going to give it roll input, so we should see a spoiler up on the left wing. Spoiler up on the right wing, and everything feels good with no binding. So all that should be good. The scissors are connected, so I can't really move the rudders, but I'm going to give it some slide input. You probably see the rudder wiggling slightly, but the nose gear being attached makes it where you can't really move the rudder very well with the rotor pedals without using a lot of force. So anyhow, I'm going to go review the video after the fact and make sure that those surfaces match what I was doing in the cockpit. All right, we're going to try this from a different angle because I couldn't see it before. So I'm looking for spoilers to come up. All right, there's roll input to the right, roll input to the left. All right, we're going to check the other side. So roll input to the left. You should see the spoilers up. Roll input to the right. All right, we're going to walk around and I'm going to show you a few of the things that got inspected on the 600-hour inspection. The gearbox lives back there through that hole, so they had to detach that rod from the gear. The landing gear legs and the tire and everything came off. Obviously, they had the airplane on jacks to do that. And that little metal fitting right there, I'm not sure if I can quite reach it. That right there is the gear trunnion. So there's the lower one, and the upper one's up here. And so those can tend to get cracks in them over time. And so that's why they're on the maintenance inspection list. So they remove the landing gear, and then a third-party company comes in and does an eddy current inspection where they check those for cracks. Let's see, they put the landing gear back on. There's the gear doors. Look at the jack screws. So there's one of the jack screws that drives the flaps. That little guy right there is the drive nut. And so I believe there's 4 of those on the airplane. So there's the main one. You can tell it's quite a bit bigger. And then there's the main flap drive nut right there. Over time, those have to be greased, but there is some wear that happens because it has some sliding friction going on every time that moves. And so they take all that apart, and then they have a thread micrometer that they measure the threads with on both the nut and the jack screw. And there's allowable limits on that for wear. If those have to be replaced, that's another thing that can be kind of expensive on this airplane. I think he said the jack screws were 12 to 15,000 each, and I believe the drive nuts were something like $6,000 a piece. So want to make sure those stay nice and greased so they stay in good shape. I'm just going to continue the walk around on the airplane. We'll check the tire for condition, overall condition of the airplane, just to make sure nobody's bumped into it with anything. The batteries live back here behind this cover, so it has these little quarter turn fasteners. You can turn that with a flathead screwdriver. You just turn it 90 degrees clockwise and it'll kind of pop out. It's spring loaded to out. So you can undo all those little quarter turn fasteners, and the batteries are in there. And back here is where all the air cycle machine and all the air conditioning and a lot of the avionics live back in there, colloquially known as the hell hole, because it's noisy and there's a lot of stuff packed in there. Walking further around the airplane, rudder boot, so that's the black thing on the leading edge there. That actually inflates to break ice off. If you're in icing conditions and ice builds up on there, that thing will sort of flex itself out and break that ice loose to clear the surface of any ice. So we just want to make sure the boots are attached, not hanging loose off the airplane or anything. Elevator surface, trim tabs in good shape. There are some attached brackets here that we're going to check as well, just for cracks and make sure that the hardware is there. And also these brackets on an mu2 are known to crack, so that's something you want to check for cracks right there. Attach hardware, and our brackets in good shape on the other side as well. Leading edge boot on the horizontal stab, the horizontal stab, or the horizontal stabilizer. Landing gear on the other side, since they did take it off, I'm just looking for hardware, make sure all the cotter pins are in where they're supposed to be. Gear trunnions on the other side. So they checked all that for cracks, so that should be good. And they did have to adjust everything when they put that back on, because this forward landing gear here, forward landing gear door, has to open first before the gear goes up or down, and so all that has to be sequenced properly. So everything needs adjusted. Anytime they remove the landing gear like that, they have to make sure that all that works. So that's why they put it on jacks, to make sure everything works correctly. Tire for condition and inflation. There's our other flapjack screw and drive nut. Main flap drive jack screw and nut. Last thing we'll check before we get in the airplane is that the tab is down on the tip tank fuel cap. These tip tanks use pressurized air to transfer fuel. If that cap is not seated well, it can actually blow fuel out the cap once you start the engines and get the bleed air on. We'll check the engine oil. We're right there by that top hole. So between the top hole and the bottom hole where the little ring is, those are the high and low marks. We're right close to the high marks, so we're in good shape there on the oil quantity. We're going to have a look at the first stage compressor. Just check it for any damage, chipping, and things like that. Obviously no foreign objects, bird nests, or anything like that. Propeller blades for condition, nicks and gouges. And that the de-icing mats are attached solidly. And we'll give it a nice spin to make sure the engine turns freely. Remove the right pitot cover. Currently the nose scissors are connected. So basically, if you wanted to disconnect it, you turn that 90 degrees up on a shoulder and they come apart. I'll just cut the video right here so I can reconnect them. And if you want to verify that the nose scissors are connected and engaged properly, you can see as I wiggle one pin, the other one moves. What that means is that they're touching in the middle. And so that's a cool way to verify that both the pins are engaged in the middle. So these are your nose gear scissors that have to be disconnected anytime you're going to tow the airplane. Obviously you want these connected because that's how you steer the airplane on the ground. The rudder pedals are connected to the nose tires via the rudder pedals. If you don't connect this guy, you don't have any nose wheel steering. We'll look up in the gear wheel. There's the uplock hooks that you're looking at. Everything looks tight. There's no oil leaks. I don't see any missing hardware. Nose tire condition. Pitot cover. We'll check the engine oil on the left engine. Same thing, we're right at the full mark. And it's a good idea to check the oil before you touch the propeller. If you turn the propeller, you can actually feed oil back into the tank, and the tank can actually read over full. So it's a good idea to check that oil level before you start moving the propeller to check the compressor. We've already checked the oil, so I'm looking for damage on the compressor blades. Looks like we're good there, no foreign objects. Propeller blades and de-ice mats. And we turn nice and freely. Wing leading edge boots in good shape. Tip tank cap is, the tab is down, so it's locked. Static wicks, we're looking for these little points here to be intact. There's several of those on the airplane. And that's the high points of the walk-arounds and the flapjack screws and the gear attach fittings that got inspected. All right, so let's talk about this invoice that we got for the airplane for the 600 hour. So $4,120 for that inspection. That's their flat price. And then there's some charges that are, you know, just $1 or $2. That's miscellaneous hardware like washers, springs, nuts, O-rings, small pieces like that. Looks like the fuel filters got changed, $99.85 each, and there's 2 of them, so $199.70 for those. Let's see, they've got $1,125 of labor for removing the main landing gear doors, remove the struts and gear legs, clean the fittings for inspections. They did a main landing gear fitting inspection, so that's the landing gear trunnions that I was talking about. Grease and reinstalled, so altogether 9 hours of labor. This shop charges $125 an hour, so $1,125 there. They have a third-party testing service that came in and did the actual eddy current inspection on the gear trunnions, $763. They checked the main landing gear gearbox mount bolt torque, $62.50. Let's see, they checked the tension on the rudder and elevator cables. It looks like they retensioned those. The pitch trim cables as well. They did a battery capacitance test, $125 for that. The other big ticket item, I was talking about how certain things that you wouldn't think would be expensive actually are expensive. So they did replace one of the 2 batteries on board the airplane, $3,895. And this looks about like a battery that you would have in maybe a diesel truck. They're sort of made a little bit better than that. The case is sort of heavier plastic and everything. So it's a very well made battery, but yeah, also with labor, it's a $4,000 battery or so. Miscellaneous stuff, they service the landing gear struts with fluid and nitrogen. Some other miscellaneous fixes here. And then they did clean the fuel nozzles. So they take the fuel nozzles out of the engines and they sent it off to Jet Air Group in Wisconsin. And they had sort of billed me an estimated amount last time, so I had to pay the balance of that. So $682.47. Grand total today, $12,548.95. That probably seems a little expensive, but for the class of airplane this is, that's actually pretty reasonable. If this was a jet, you could probably multiply that by 4 or so. Another thing that was probably way more expensive than you think it would be, I talked a little bit earlier in another segment about the shear pin for the landing gear door. And so I have a spare on hand just in case that shears, and I could have a mechanic somewhere else replace that if I needed to. That little pin, there's my finger for scale, over $1,600 from Mitsubishi. So most things on this airplane are pretty reasonable, but there's certain small things that cost way more than you think they would. Again, overall it is a really good value, but there are still some big bills that go with it sometimes.